welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 153. Are introverts reluctant heroes in their own stories? I've shared on a few occasions about the roles we play in our lives, and therefore the stories we tell and hang on to, and sometimes catastrophize. We all know that introverts supposedly hate the limelight, but that's not true for all and is another example of unhelpful generalizations. So if I were to suggest that we can all be the hero of our own stories, some will take to it easier than others. Here's why I think it's an important concept though, and as far as I'm concerned, it really has nothing to do with ego. This is where I think many online marketers miss the mark when creating and sharing their own hero's journey, the rags to riches stories we see so often on social media. You know how it goes. This time last year I was living in a skip and now I'm a multi-millionaire. Just follow my steps and this could be you too. Not only can I seldom relate to their journey, but I know that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. Following exact steps, and many of these gurus insist that you trust the process and do exactly what I say if you don't want to fail. How does that allow for individuality, diversity and inclusion? Many of them will try to shame those who question the process by saying something like, clearly you don't want it enough then, or so you're not committed then, or something similar. I've had gurus try to handle my objections rather than exploring my questions with me, and that's a very different process. I mentioned that many typical heroes' journeys don't resonate with me, and here's why. You know how important authenticity is to me, and because I've never been homeless, never been really down on my luck actually, even when I'd had to count the pennies to make it through the month, I'd always still considered myself to be fortunate. I resisted taking that victim role that I've mentioned in other episodes. After all, there was always someone worse off than me, and actually a lot of the population in that camp. Partly by attitude, partly by circumstance. So playing the victim doesn't help in any way, really. What I realised is that more often than not, in my life, I'd chosen to be the hero or heroine, if that distinction matters to you, because why wouldn't I? So do we as introverts really make reluctant heroes? I'd say more understated or quiet heroes than reluctant ones. The hero's journey is one we're very familiar with, as most movies and books are based around this format. And the reason they resonate with us is because, to some extent, we recognise ourselves in these plots and stories. The expert I'm turning to here is Joseph Campbell, a professor of literature and a researcher in comparative mythology. Through his research, Campbell had discovered that all myths are cyclical and they follow a pattern. Whilst all of the characters in a myth have a role, the main hero of the story is usually undertaking a significant journey, although the significance is not always apparent until near the end. And Campbell defines a hero as someone who has tamed his own demons. The journey has several steps through which our hero will suffer some setbacks, yet ultimately emerge triumphant. All of us will have suffered some setbacks in our lives, and whilst they have been important in our development, many of us choose not to let them define us. Here's a few problems as I see it though for some of my introverted clients. They see introversion as a setback from which there is no place to emerge triumphantly. Easy to understand in our society that favours the extrovert ideal, and yet introversion is a gift, not a setback. Secondly, the constant conflation with depression, shyness and misanthropy, even by introverts themselves, creates a narrative of contraction and stuckness. And thirdly, comparisonitis often has introverts looking around yet failing to see the quieter ones making a real mark on the world. Look closer, for they are there. So in this episode, I thought I'd see if I can use Campbell's structure of the hero's journey to accurately depict my own journey through life. Let's see if I can unearth how I am indeed a hero in my own story. Step 1. Ordinary world. We all start off living ordinary lives, says Campbell, in an ordinary world with ordinary problems. I happened to be the second child of parents who were teachers, and all seemed very ordinary to me. Of course, it's not until we start to mature that we notice the differences between ourselves and others. My ordinary problems were testing my boundaries as I grew into my teenage years, finding my rebellious streak and marrying too young because I thought I knew better, and if I'm honest, to prove something to my family. Well, that didn't work, did it? For me, I lived much of my life in the ordinary world, or what felt ordinary to me at the time. Step 2 is the call to adventure, and as Campbell says, future heroes hear a call to adventure, something that shakes them from their ordinary life. As I look back over my life, I now recognise that there were many such calls, many of which I didn't heed. I considered them as part of the ordinary. This is actually not uncommon, as step 3 is known as the refusal of the call. Like many before me and all after me, most heroes are reluctant at first and usually try to procrastinate, refusing to heed the call. The call I'll be referring to here is the call that came when my mother died, as I recognised as an adult orphan that I was at a crossroads and there were many directions I could take. I joined a women's mastermind group in an attempt to discover which was the right way to proceed for me. And whilst the germ of the idea of flourishing introverts was planted at that time, I procrastinated, prevaricated and protested for all of my own incapabilities. During that time, I connected with one of the mastermind group in particular who challenged me, supported me and helped me see the potential of my mission. At that point, I had entered step 4, meeting with the mentor. This is typically when our potential hero meets someone who convinces them to embark on a journey, in spite of the initial reluctance. I can so resonate with this, and there have been many mentors for me, and the right one always seemed to appear at the right time. What is that old aphorism? When a student is ready, the master will appear. My gratitude for my mentors has inspired me to be available as a mentor for others if they think I'm the right person. Step 5 is called crossing the threshold. It's during this step that the future hero takes the first step of their adventure. I'd recently established Flourishing Introverts under the umbrella of my limited company, but the next steps were somewhat hazy. I then received a nudge from a long-time buddy who told me that the closing date for applications for TEDx Folkestone was in just 2 days. A TEDx had been on my bucket list for some time. I always knew that I wanted to do one as part of my legacy, but didn't know what it would be about or how I'd start. Now I knew my starting point. I rushed my application, which included a written piece, a short video of me talking about what I wanted to cover in my talk, and a little about my favourite TEDx. The short deadline was probably a good thing, as given too long, I'd just have prevaricated for even longer. I look back at that video and squirm. But you know what? Done is better than perfect, and it did the job. I got accepted. I can now probably say I was at step 6, the challenges. Campbell notes that on the journey, the hero encounters many problems, setbacks, and failures. If the TEDx was me crossing the threshold, and that in itself was a huge challenge, the years since have provided false starts, deviations into rabbit holes, massive self-doubt, and a desire to throw in the towel. But in the hero's journey, these challenges have to be overcome in order to continue, and continue I did, right into step 7. Step 7, approach to the innermost cave. This occurs when the hero overcomes all of the initial challenges. What's left then is the biggest challenge of them all, themselves. I'd already encountered the self-doubt, and now it was time to strike a deal with my inner critic, time to get my inner advocate to play gatekeeper to the critic, and time to awaken my inner rebel so that I felt more supported internally. This should have enabled me to get out of my own way, but that is easier said than done, which took me swiftly to step 8, the ordeal. At this point in the journey, the hero usually realizes what their biggest weakness is and goes on to confront it. My biggest weakness was my limiting beliefs, those firmly entrenched, embedded beliefs developed and reinforced over decades that always presented a reason as to why I couldn't do something, or why I wouldn't be successful, or why I wouldn't leave the legacy I so desired. Next up on the journey is step 9, the reward. This is when the hero successfully confronts their biggest weakness, in my case, my limiting beliefs, and emerges triumphant, a better, stronger person. Well, I'm certainly better and stronger, but this is still work in progress, as pesky limiting beliefs have a habit of popping up in new places. Do you remember that children's game, Whack-A-Mole? In my experience, dealing with limiting beliefs is a bit like playing that game over and over and over. Fortunately, I started to notice a pattern and could almost predict when the next one would pop up and from where. They still have the potential to catch me out though, so I need to remain alert. And now here I am at step 10, the road back. I'm at the point of sharing what I've learned with those who are ready to hear it. I have new wisdom, deeper understanding, and a greater sense of empathy for my fellow introverts. My podcasts, TV shows, weekly reflections, and occasional blogs are my way of sharing what I have learned. And the journey continues for me. I'm not at the end of my journey, and as flourishing is a journey, not a destination, that's okay with me. I'm not the finished article, but still work in progress. So I'm still to face step 11, the resurrection. This is apparently the moment when a hero pulls out a last-second victory from the brink of defeat. I can't begin to think what that will be, and I can't say I'm really looking forward to it. But you know what? I'm ready. Bring it on. If it's part of the journey, I want to experience it. How can I share authentically otherwise? If I dip out now, if I turn tail and decide it's all too difficult, the journey so far will have been in vain. And I need to continue because the last step of the journey is step 12, the return with the elixir. This is where the newly enlightened hero gives back to the community. Well, I'm choosing not to wait until I've completed this step to give back, as there is already so much value I can add and help I can offer to introverts as they embark on their own flourishing journey. I have a deep sense that there is no one elixir, no one way to do things, no one solution, and that the components I have found may be custom blended by those looking for their own way forward. A pinch of this, a drop of that, and a whole bunch of the other. So, are you a reluctant or understated hero? Campbell says, if you do follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you, and the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. Sounds a lot like flourishing and living a fulfilled life to me. So are you ready? Ready to find the track that has been waiting for you? Ready to be the hero of your own journey? Ready to find the blend of components that works for you? I wonder what challenges you'll encounter, both internal and external. Suffice to say, introversion is not one of them. It's our gift. I do hope in some way I've whetted your appetite for the journey ahead. And please know that I am here should you need a guide, a helping hand, or a nudge. That's what mentors are for. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us, and leave a comment, because we know that that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.